I may ruffle a few feathers with this video, so let's just say right up front that this is all my opinion. I'm not coming for your supplies. Don't worry, I'm not going to sneak into your house like some freaky little Bujo anti-fairy and steal your shit. I promise you. All my opinion. Don't come for me. Hey everybody, in today's video I will be continuing our conversation about consumerism and the planner community by talking about some overrated bullet journal supplies. Now what do I mean by that? Do I mean none of these are necessary? Well, yeah, none of them are necessary. That doesn't mean you can't use them. However, I am just pointing out when I go into... Be prepared that my cat might be running all over the place in this video too. Lucy is on one today. What I'm referring to specifically is this thing that I see in the bullet journal community, bullet journal groups, bullet journal videos of people who have like unending supplies. And for newer people to bullet journaling who feel like that's what's necessary to be part of this hobby, like I said, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, my dude. For people who are new to this hobby, they feel like you have to have all this shit to be able to actually participate in it, and that's not the case. Any of these supplies are all fine and dandy if you use them, but you don't need them to actually participate in bullet journaling and creative journaling. So that's kind of the concept I'm going for here. And we're going to start with number one, and it's kind of the basis of bullet journaling, and that is hella new notebooks. Now, what do I mean by that? It's real easy to go down the rabbit hole of bullet journaling, the different types of paper, the different weights of paper, the different colors of paper, dot grid versus regular grid versus lined versus blank versus watercolor paper versus Tomoe River paper versus whatever the case may be. There's so many different notebooks, so many different notebook brands, and so many different notebooks du jour, whatever the really huge people on YouTube are using or whether the people on Instagram are using. You'll notice that different brands go in and out of fashion based on what people start using and what starts becoming trendy. Now, you need a notebook to bullet journal. That's obvious. And it is important to find a notebook style, paper style, whatever that works for you. However, what I am specifically referring to is when you start a notebook and then you hate how it's turning out. So instead of just turning the page, as my friend Mari Mundo would say, you just get rid of the notebook and start a new one. That's what's overrated. Just fucking use one notebook. Commit yourself to it until it's done. And if you feel like it's taking forever, move to daily pages. Do a lot of doodling. Do a lot of note taking. Glue your pages together. There's ways to get through notebooks quickly. But all of this bullshit of starting a notebook, using it for 3 pages, and then going to another notebook because you feel like you messed it up, not only is that spending way too much money unnecessarily, it's also using a lot of extra paper, a lot of extra resources, and I'm going to admit it, that the paper crafting, crafty, papery, all of our kinds of hobbies in this realm are not exactly the most environmentally friendly. So not wasting shit because, oh, I might have screwed up. Be happy with your screw-ups because they show the progress that you've made, save you money, and on top of all of that, you're not overusing a bunch of supplies that really it's not super responsible to be overusing. Now this next one is going to sound like sacrilege if you know me and you know what I have collected in this house. Actually, several of these are going to. And maybe I should also add right here that many of the things I talk about in this video are things I have a lot of. So this is kind of a do as I say, not as I do sort of moment. But something I really wanted to make note of was Fineliner pens. I love Fineliner pens. I use the shit out of Fineliner pens in my bullet journal, in my planner, for drawing, everything else. And they are a very popular situation when it comes to bullet journaling. Here's the thing. Even if you want to try every Fineliner pen on the planet, you don't need them all at once. And here's why, my friends. They dry out. So eventually you will have stockpiled so many pens and then you'll pick one up and it'll be all dry and crusty and you're going to be like, God damn it. Especially since Fineliner pens often tend to be a little pricier than, say, a gel pen or a ballpoint pen. Go buy one or a pack of different tip sizes, discover what you like, use it until it falls apart, and then get more. Don't stockpile Fineliner pens because you might dip into your stash one day and then discover you wasted a bunch of money. Again, this is do as I say, not as I do, but this is also kind of a coming to Jesus moment for me because the other day I went into my stash and sure enough, some of my shit had dried out. So learn from my mistakes, my dudes. Another overrated supply in the bullet journal world is excess coloring supplies. Now, I am talking about having hella different markers and highlighters and colored pencils and pastels and watercolors and all of that. it is real easy to go ham right off the bat, especially if you watch somebody who's like, these are my favorite bullet journaling supplies. And then they list 3 kinds of watercolor palettes, 2 different kinds of markers, and 2 different sets of highlighters. You go out and buy all that shit without ever coloring in your bullet journal, without ever watercoloring before, the chances are you might discover that you don't like some of those things, or that you just are not a fan of that particular style. Go slowly. Again, like with the fineliner, some of these things can dry out, but on the same note, I am not an advocate of spending hella money on something until you know you're going to use it. So with watercolors, as an example, if you want to try watercoloring in your bullet journaling or the hobby of watercoloring to begin with, if you're going to spend money on anything, spend it on the paper at the beginning. My suggestion is if you're going to invest in a watercolor set and you want to just buy a cheap one to play with, get the prong set from Michaels, because for all of the super cheap, like elementary school level watercolors, it's probably the most pigmented and the easiest to use once you get the hang of it. And if you're going to go a slightly higher step up, go with the Prima Watercolors confection sets or the Jane Davenport sets. They're not that expensive. They are really nice colors for student grade, and you will be able to get some use out of them before you decide whether or not you want to actually invest in watercolors. Because honestly, it's not worth it. It's the same with markers. Don't go buy the huge set of Tombow markers because you see somebody liking them if you don't even know if you're going to use them. Go for the Crayola Super Tips. But if you get the Crayola Super Tips, you don't need to buy 3 other sets of markers because there's a billion Crayola Super Tips out there, and maybe you should use those first before you invest in more coloring supplies. Part of the problem here is that in terms of coloring supplies, especially at like the student grade and the elementary school grade level, things like Crayola, Prong, all that, they're not that expensive, so it's real easy to scoop a whole bunch of them up. And then it gets overwhelming and you don't know what you want to use. Like anything else, start small, then add on to it if you decide it's something you actually want to keep doing. You might get super ham and buy hella markers and then discover you just like using a pen and a notebook for your bullet journaling, and then you'll have all this shit that you're not going to use that's going to go to waste. So start really small. And I will add, as a side note, highlighters I kind of enveloped into here. But here's the thing, my dudes. Speaking again as somebody who wasted some money on highlighters recently, if you're going to use them as markers, it's the same situation as buying too many markers at once. If you own Tombows or if you own Crayola Super Tips, you may not need mild liner highlighters right off the bat because you've already got markers, and if that's how you're going to use them, then that's how you're going to use them. If you're going to use them as highlighters, think real carefully about what you're going to use highlighters for. If you need them for note-taking or whatever and you don't need all those colors, you don't need to spend all that money. You could be just fine with just a regular 3-pack of highlighters. Stop and think about what you're going to use and why you're going to use it before you drop a bunch of change on something just because a bunch of other people say it's their favorite thing to use in their bullet journal. This whole conversation is about thinking before you plunk down your credit card or your cash money. I'm just saying. And this is, again, do as I say, not as I do. I don't even want to talk about how much money I have wasted on coloring supplies, art supplies, pens, all the fucking things. Like, this is me being either really hypocritical or putting my hand up and saying I'm a stationery addict and I'm trying to help you save some money because holy shit, at this point, I don't even want to know how much I've spent. Okay, this one's going to be real controversial if you know me at all, but let's just say that in the last 3 months, while I still use this item in other aspects of my crafting and planning life, when it comes to my bullet journal, it hasn't touched my bullet journal except in like one situation. And so I feel kind of strongly about this. And it's washi tape. Washi tape is one of those rabbit holes that is super easy to fall down. It can be considered cheap per item, although it adds up really quickly. And there are so many different varieties that it can be real easy to go into like the washi Pokemon land of gotta catch 'em all. How are you going to use it in your bullet journal? Where are you going to use it in your bullet journal? Now, I use the shit out of washi tape in my planner because I use it for color coordinating for all sorts of other things. And I used to use it that way in my bullet journal, but I'm not using it that way now. And I've realized that even when I did use it in my bullet journal, it was to just line pages with, which is all well and good. But how much of it do you really need? How much of it are you really going to use? Because again, going back to the Fineliner pens, washi tape does go kind of bad. It's not like it gets moldy. It's not like it smells funny. maybe, but it does start to be problematic when you pull it off the roll and it starts to shred. I've had this happen with washi tape I've had for years. Even really high quality washi tape, eventually it starts to become a pain in the ass to use. So part of me wonders at the wisdom of having the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rolls of washi tape that I do. And so if you're beginning and you really want to use washi tape in your planner, my suggestion would be to limit yourself to a color palette of colors you know you're going to use that coordinates with maybe the markers you already have, and to not buy it until you've used at least 1 or 2 of those rolls up. Do as I say, not as I do, my dudes. It's kind of the mantra of this video. I'm going to close this video out with something that's going to be the most controversial of them all. I'm prepared for it. I'm girding my loins for all of the pushback I'm going to get in the comments. And in all honesty, this is something that I actually do consider to be extremely overrated, and I don't use this at all in my bullet journal. And I feel like people could get away with not using it if they just sort of stopped worrying just a little bit. And that is rulers. I know. I'm gonna get so much shit in the comments for this. Now, I've had people comment on my bullet journal videos that somehow I am a master at drawing straight lines without having a ruler. That's not true. It looks like that on camera, but up close, my lines are all over the place. The reason I'm comfortable not using a ruler isn't because my lines are so straight. It's because I just don't give a shit. Now, if you really do give a shit, or if your hands shake and using a ruler is going to be really helpful for you, then by all means, use a ruler. But you don't need to get an expensive fancy ruler. A straight edge is just going to work just fine for you. You could use a book. You could use one of the 8 other notebooks that you've been hoarding as a straight edge if you want to. If you're using a dot grid or a grid notebook, the measurements are on the page. Like, you don't need to measure by measurements. You just measure by squares or by grids. You don't need a ruler to do that. I'm just saying. My impassioned plea to people who are really dependent on their rulers but don't want to be anymore is that maybe you should start thinking that it's okay to have wobbly lines. As a matter of fact, I think they're kind of arty looking to have lines that aren't perfectly straight. I know that this is a controversial opinion. A lot of you are going to be like, fuck you can pry my ruler from my cold dead hands. And that's totally fine. Again, I'm not hating on rulers in general. What I am saying is that going out and spending hella money on expensive ass metal rulers so that you can have a nice ruler for your bullet journal is so unnecessary. It's real easy to just pick up something cheap in plastic, or if you have an Erin Condren planner or like an Inkwell press, often they come with a plastic ruler or just a straight edge that you already have. Of all the investments I see people making in their bullet journal, investing in a really nice ruler has always just struck me as like, why? I just don't get it. To me, that's super overrated. Probably the most overrated of anything in this video. And now I'm just gonna wait for the onslaught. Don't hate me, everybody, for saying that. Those are my 5 overrated kind of groups of supplies for bullet journaling. I feel like in all of these cases, any of these are something you might use, but they are all rabbit holes where you can spend a whole bunch of money before you know exactly what you want. And if you take one lesson away from this, it's use what you want, but just be thoughtful in how you purchase, when you purchase, and how much money you're spending on it. Don't just go ham because somebody else tells you to, because you never know what it is you're gonna like. I'd love to hear from you in the comments what you think an overrated bullet journal or planner supply is. Tell me about it. I know we are all hoarders here. Okay, maybe we're not all hoarders, but a lot of that, don't even look at my books in the background. But like, if you're in this community, chances are you tend to love collecting stationery stuff, but I'm sure over time you have discovered some things are either things that you've gotten a lot of and you don't use anymore, or you never got in the first place. Let me know about your overrated picks in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, my dudes, peace out.